Well, greetings. Welcome back to our study on the book of Esther. So glad that you could join us today. Today we are talking about Esther chapter 5. If you have not read the chapter yet, I encourage you to pause the video, go back, read the chapter, and then come back and start again with us. But in Esther chapter 5, we pick up right after the queen has done her fast. She has fasted. The author doesn't describe the fast. Usually, things like this, rituals, sacred events, are described in the book. But probably because, like we've said before, Esther is meant to be read during a time of feasting. Um, it's probable, it's likely that the author didn't want you to be distracted by a fast while you have a huge plate of food and probably a cup of wine in front of you. So he did not write about the fast because that would be distracting. Instead, he just picks up with Esther having completed her 3 days of fasting. Her and Mordecai and all of the Jewish people have completed their 3 days of fasting, and now she is ready to approach the queen. The first detail that we should notice is that Esther puts on her royal robes. This is the first time in the book that Esther is presented as a queen, as a royal. This is the first time that she takes on the mantle. We're told that she gets beauty treatments. We're told that she is seductive. We're told all these other things. But here we have her putting on the office of the queen of her people. And that's an important detail. It's one that's easily overlooked, like so many details are, but it's significant because coming out of the fast, coming out of this religious duty that she has done, this religious ceremony that she's partaken in, she is now the queen of her people and she is ready to take on that mantle, that responsibility. And she goes in front of the king. Now, when she talks to Mordecai in the previous chapter, she makes it sound like if you walk into the same room with the king, you're dead. Here we get a slightly different picture. Here we get a picture of Esther walking into the back of the king's throne room as he is holding court. Ancient kings used to hold court. They would have this time where they would sit in their throne. All of the petitioners would gather in the back of the room and they would come up one at a time and petition the king for justice. That is the picture that we're seeing here. And what we can surmise is what Esther meant when she told Mordecai that it was death to enter the king's presence. That if she just walked up in front of the king and crowded in and pushed her way to the forward during his audience time, this would be unacceptable. Or if she approached him at a time that he wasn't having audience times, that would be unacceptable. There are, or what we see here is the king had times when he allowed people to gather and petition him. This is standard practice for kings of the time. Anybody could come petition the king, but as we all know, it is very helpful to look the part. And so Esther puts on her nicest clothes, does herself up pretty nice so that she will stand out. I mean, think about it from the perspective of any person of power. When you see in the back that 3, 4, 5 people want to talk to you, and one of them is wearing the really nice suit or the really formal clothing, and a couple others look like, construction workers or somebody who does menial labor, who is the first person that the person of power is going to want to call forward? Well, obviously, the person who looks like they're a powerful equal. Their petition takes precedent over what, in the king's perspective, would be trivial, minor issues that anybody could deal with. So he's going to, of course, call one of his wives forward before other more trivial, at least in his eyes, more trivial matters. It does turn out that Esther has something very important to say. And the king says, well, what do you want? I will give you up to half of my kingdom. this seems to be a rhetorical device. It is not meant to be taken literally. Esther doesn't seem to take it literally. It definitely seems like something that is meant to say to her and to us that the king is favorably disposed to her. Hey, whatever you need, I'm going to do for you. Think about it that way. Not so much literal as, hey, Esther, what do you need? Because I like you. You're going to get it. We do see this, by the way, later, this same language where Herod promises his wife's daughter anything she wants up to half his kingdom. It seems to be kind of at least a biblical way of making an exaggerated promise to somebody who is in good favor with the king. So Esther, though, she recognizes the gravity of the situation. She doesn't ask for what she wants. She just doesn't ask for what she wants. She decides that the best course of action is to invite the king to dinner. Now, this has a lot of benefits. This is a great political strategy. For Esther's part, this is something that's going to get her alone time with the king. Nobody else can kind of worm their way into the time. No outside influences, just her and the king. Now, she's going to do something really smart here and invite Haman along too. But the idea is the king doesn't get counselors. He doesn't get the privilege of calling in his wisest people. He has her one-on-one. She gets to plead her case, and he has to listen. Now, that is important. That for her, that's what she gets out of this one-on-one time. For the king, he gets a really nice evening. Think about what we were told just a couple chapters before this on how Esther is made in her position, how she's given this position as one of his wives. She gets one night alone with the king where she gets to seduce him in any way that she seems fit. She gets to control the evening. And what's the king's mind going to go to? That first night that they were together, where the queen did something really phenomenal for him. She was very seductive and probably wined and dined him in a way that he really liked. And his mentality is he is going to get more of the same. She's going to have her time with him, but he gets exactly what he wants out of the deal. He gets a very seductive and attractive woman catering to him. So the king gets something that he wants too out of this. Haman, he gets something he wants, political clout. He is the only person invited to this dinner with the royal couple. Now, in Haman's mind, that's very important because he wants to elevate himself. He has already reached about the top level of society. How can he go up anymore? He can't. He cannot elevate his position anymore except to be king himself. And that is not likely to happen. So the only way he can raise himself is by having these kinds of social events that just awe everybody else around him. To be invited to this is just glorious publicity. And so he's going to let his guard down a little bit. We know that because that's how we act when we are in a what we perceive as a socially very beneficial situation where we can really do no wrong. We let our guard down some. That's human nature. And so the king and Haman come to the queen's chambers. She probably would have had not a huge palace, but probably a couple of rooms that were her own. She probably would have lived in a building with a lot of other women, but she would have had apartments that were hers where she got to decorate and got to have some measure of privacy. The king comes to this area with Haman, and they get wined and dined. Because after all, so far in this story, if we see the king and we see Haman, we're seeing drinking. That's just how this works. So the king gets this time with the queen. She wines and dines him. And towards the end of the evening, or at least what we're told, kind of get this impression of towards the end of the evening, or at least in the middle of the evening, the king goes, okay, so you didn't just invite me here to have a good time tonight. What do you want? What is it that you want? And this is where the queen really shines. This is where Esther truly becomes the queen. And she says, well, what I want can wait. Let's have a good time tonight. And you and Haman, and I'll throw another banquet tomorrow for you and Haman. Now, this is a subtle difference. The first time she says it is, I'm going to throw a banquet for you and Haman can come along. And this time she says, I'm going to throw a banquet for you and Haman. Now, some commentators will suggest that this subtle change is significant. It is meant to kind of ingratiate Haman more into the group. It's meant to pull him in further. Thus, when she springs the trap, there is less chance of escape, because in his mind, he is much more on the inside. He thinks that she likes him, that she wants to get to know him, that she values him as an advisor. Maybe, maybe not. But the king is pleased. He gets to drink again. That's kind of his MO. He wants to drink and party. And so he agrees to come along for this next party, this next banquet, and says to the queen, sure, we'll come along tomorrow night. Now, at this point, we ought to be thinking about what's going on in Esther's head. What are these kinds of motives say about us? Is it right to play on the king this way? But we should also be thinking about, how did her fasting maybe prepare her for this? Maybe this is how God is working through her a little bit, and we're just not quite prepared to see it. This could be a slow process of God working through her a little bit at a time, where she isn't quite up to talking to the king at this one. Hey, so let's have another one of these tomorrow night, and then I'll tell you. But we want to think about those kinds of questions as we're reading through this. The banquet ends. Haman goes home. This is the only appearance of Mordecai in the chapter. Mordecai just stands there. He is not a character in this chapter. He is a prop. That's all he is. He's just a prop. He just stands there. And Haman can't stand it. All Mordecai has to do is stand still. Haman, in Mordecai's presence, breaks down like a little kid. He can't take it. He cannot tolerate Mordecai's existence. And that, we need to think long and hard about how Haman's behavior towards Mordecai is really an exaggeration of her own feelings towards some people. We need to kind of look at ourselves and go, when do I act like Mordecai? When does having this one person around me change me to the point that I am just irrational and angry? They don't even have to do anything. Just their presence makes me irrational and angry. That's Haman. That is Haman's response to Mordecai existing. But yet Haman feels that Mordecai is so far beneath him that killing Mordecai is no big deal. I have to kill Mordecai and all Mordecai's people because that's the only compensation for the slight against me. This is huge character flaw in Haman. And it is kind of an exaggerated character flaw, but it's one that is very easy for us to fall into. And it's one that you ought to think about. You ought to consider where this crops up in your life, because it affects each of us. This kind of hatred, this kind of animosity towards people, maybe not to the degree of Haman, but it does cut through us. I like this line from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian author who wrote Gulag Archipelago. I'm not going to quote it, but the summary is, we have to remember that the line between good and evil does not run between me and you or my people and your people. It runs down the middle of each of us. The line between good and evil is something that we all battle. It is something that is profoundly real in each of us, and Haman sees it in Mordecai. Every time he gets around Mordecai, he loses this battle to evil and hatred. And that sets us up for this ridiculous ending to this chapter. Haman goes home furious at Mordecai and the way Mordecai exists and is part of his world. And he asks his wife, what should I do about this man? This man who is just making my life a nightmare. What should I do? And Haman's wife is cut from the same cloth that Haman is cut from. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. These two are peas in a pod, because her response to Haman is this: go out and set up a pole that is 75 feet high. Think about that. Think about that. Most buildings in the ancient world would not have been that tall. The king's palace probably would not have been that tall. Many buildings in even small town America are not nearly that tall. Churches, if a church steeple hits 75 feet, that's pretty high. This is an incredible edifice, and it's a wooden stake. I know that if you're reading like the NIV and some other things, it'll say gallows. Probably not. Although that would be just as ludicrous to set up 75-foot high gallows. We don't really have as much evidence for killing people with hanging around the neck like you're thinking of in the Wild West, and that you would have a gallows. This is probably impaling somebody on a pike. And 75 feet off the ground is ludicrous, because not only would you have to build a 75-foot tall stake, you'd have to build scaffolding 75 feet high. And then you either have to carry Mordecai alive 75 feet up this scaffolding, up ladders, or you have to figure out a way to get his dead body 75 feet up in the air to impale it on this spike. So this is obviously meant to be hyperbole. This is not meant to be a literal conversation between Haman and his wife. No one would make a 75-foot tall stake for impaling somebody. At least not that I've ever heard of. Maybe I'm wrong, but it is meant to be a little bit hyperbole, that this is a ludicrous punishment for a man who stood there. And think about it. You're having a great meal. You're having a couple glasses of wine, and you hear this. You're going to be snickering. There's just no other way around it. You're going to snicker at this. You're going to laugh. He wants to do what? He wants to build a 75-foot tall stake and then put somebody's body on it? That's just stupid. And that's what you're supposed to think. These people are so evil, or not so evil. They are allowing evil to control them so much that they're making ludicrous plans that have no basis in reality. And that's where it ends. We are about to hit the turning point of the book of Esther. We're 5 chapters in, almost exactly halfway in, and we're about to hit the turning point. Mordecai is about as low as he possibly can be. He's way down here. He cannot get lower. He is about to die for existing and die in a very humiliating way. Haman, on the other hand, is about as high as he can be. He just had dinner with the royal couple, alone with the royal couple. He's about to have dinner with the royal couple again tomorrow, and he is about to go ask the king permission to humiliate and murder his biggest rival. And he's about to humiliate and murder his biggest rival in a way that is just absolutely terrible. And he's going to get away with it legally. He's going to be condoned for this. You can't get higher than Haman. You can't get much lower than Mordecai. And yet this is the point in the story where we're about to see tables turned. Why? Because we see in Esther's character, God's already starting to work. She's already becoming the queen she is meant to be. And so Mordecai, we know, will start to become the character and the hero that he is supposed to be. And Haman, the villain, will start to be treated in the way he is supposed to be treated. We're going to see the great reversal. And that starts in chapter 6. I hope that you will join me for that. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I will try to respond to those. Until we meet again, God bless.